Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Alicia and I'm the owner of Alicia Be Creative. In today's tutorial, we are doing a beginner friendly tutorial in this glitter vinyl split design. Of course, I will show you all the products that I use today and the step-by-step process of how I put this together. So of course you can check out all the products I use in today's video down in the description box, but let's go ahead and jump right into today's tutorial. All right, so as I mentioned, I am going to walk you through the step-by-step process of how to put together today's tutorial. And I'm going to start by just showing you the products that we're going to be using today. As I mentioned in the introduction, this will be all listed in the description box, and you can even find discount codes to save you some money. So the first thing that I do, and the process for me when I am creating a tumbler, is I am going to prep my tumbler. So this is a 20-ounce thick from Maker Flow Crafts, and I am going to be sanding the surface of this tumbler with a 60 grit sanding block. Any grit of sanding block will work. You can also use just sandpaper, whatever you have on hand. But the idea here is to really scuff up the surface of this and remove that manufacturer coating and shine to really scuff up the surface and give your paint something to stick to. So since we're doing a split tumbler design, I'm going to take some painter's tape. This is 1/2-inch painter's tape that I purchased off of Amazon, and I'm going to eyeball about the halfway point on the bottom of the cup, and that is going to be sort of what I tape off and how I will determine which portion is going to be all of vinyl. So I have this vinyl. This was a 12 by 12 vinyl sheet from Batty Glitter, and this was part of the Pastel Dreams collection. So the vinyl can be purchased separately. So the first thing I like to do when I'm applying vinyl is I already had half of the sheet left. So I like to sort of size this approximately on the cup to see how much of this vinyl I'm going to need. I always give myself a little bit of wiggle room, so a little bit of extra vinyl on either end, as well as the top and bottom, just so that I have a little bit that I might need to cut away later in case I end up applying this a little wonky. Just want to have a little bit of grace, if you will, to make sure that this gets wrapped completely on this larger side. So I'll start by removing the backing by like 1/2 inch, and then I'll adhere that right over the tape line. Again, I like to make sure I have quite a bit of an overlap over the tape, and then we're going to sort of peel that backing and roll that on with our fingers, just taking our time going back and forth and just smoothing that vinyl down so that it is on the tumbler and there aren't any bubbles or any wrinkles in the vinyl as we apply it. Once we've done that, we will just go ahead and trim off the excess. I like to just run my finger along the seam section where that meets. That way I can ensure that I am sort of using that groove of my nail to then tape, or use that craft knife to tape or to cut away the excess. And I'll do this on both sides of the cup. Then we're going to go ahead and just cut a thin strip off the bottom. Since I will be painting this, I am going to just make sure I have a nice clean bottom and that we don't have any overlap of the vinyl on the bottom, so that I can paint and not have to worry about that vinyl sort of getting in the way. Now, to sort of save tape here, I'm just sort of cutting and removing the tape we just used that sort of was our guideline for where half of this tumbler is. We're just going to kind of remove that off the cup and just replace it now on top of the vinyl. And the reason for this is so that we can protect our vinyl from the layer of paint that we're going to be adding, so that we can, of course, apply our glitter. So once I have the tape applied, and I'm just cutting away any excess or overlap, so all I have taped off is sort of the edge of each of the vinyl, we can go ahead and get into adding our paint. So we're using the paint Bluebell. This is just an acrylic matte craft paint that you can use. I get these from Hobby Lobby. They are really quick drying and inexpensive to purchase at any craft store. But any paint that you have on hand will do. What I would like to say about painting your tumbler is just making sure you have enough cups that you can't see, enough coats of that paint that you can't see the stainless steel underneath. So usually 1 to 2 coats will do, and you may have to do more depending on how translucent your glitter is. If you're working with a more opaque glitter, so something that really isn't very see-through, then really you'll have no issues with going in with maybe 1 coat and it still being a little spotty. But typically I'll do at least 2 coats. And so with my second coat, after I've dried that first coat with my fan, I'm going to add Mod Podge to my second coat, because we will add paint with the glue, and then we will glitter right over this to sort of save us the step in having to dry and then apply our paint, or apply our glue. So we'll do a nice even coat here. I like to use the fluffy makeup brushes from Dollar Tree. These are the Wet n Wild brushes. You can also buy them on Amazon, but they are cheaper to buy from the dollar store. But these are kind of my go-to brushes because they really allow that paint to spread on super smooth, and I get less streaks than I do with some of the other traditional paint brushes that you can buy from craft stores. We're going to go in with our glitter now that we have a nice layer on there. This is Icicle from Batty Glitter. This was part of like I think it was the winter bundle. It's such a pretty blue. I have so many blues in my collection, and this is one I have not yet used. And so it was really nice to be able to use this glitter. So I will list this glitter, of course, down in the description box, link directly to it if it's still available, and the discount code that you can use to save yourself 10% off of your order. Once we've applied our glitter, I am going to immediately remove the tape, and this is to make sure that that tape doesn't basically get glued down to our cup. We want to make sure we remove that tape to make sure that that doesn't permanently stick to our cup, and we're going to allow this cup to dry. So I'm going to let this sit for about an hour or so and just let that paint and glitter and glue dry. And once it's dry, I'm going to take a dry paintbrush and just brush off any excess glitter. You can do this over the trash can, which is typically what I do, but I wanted to show you guys as part of the process, so I'm showing it for you in camera. And so I'm going to really aggressively brush off all of the glitter on the cup, making sure that I don't have any glitter on my vinyl, because of course I want to keep that clear. Now we're going to go into the sealing process. So I always use Rust-Oleum 2x clear or matte spray paint as my sealing, and I do about 2 coats. So you just saw me do 1 coat, I let that dry, and I do a 2nd coat, and this is really going to make sure that my glitter doesn't migrate as I am trying to epoxy for the first coats. So now we're over at my turner, and we're going to do our first coats of epoxy over the raw glitter and vinyl. So I'm using Flint's Sister Supply Shop Fast Cure, and this is going to ensure that my cup is epoxied and ready to sort of go to the next step quicker. And so we're going to be doing equal parts of part A and part B. So I'm using 30 mLs in total, so 15 of part A and part B. So before I pour that and start to mix, the first thing I do want to make sure that I do after applying my gloves and then putting my respirator on is that I am going to take my level and just make sure that my cup is level on the turner, okay? So I really want to make sure that the coat of epoxy goes on nice and smooth, right? And I don't end up with a muffin top, which is when your epoxy pools at the top or bottom of your tumbler. So making sure that your cup is level is key to ensure that you don't have any issues with that. Once I've gotten my 2 parts of epoxy together, I mix for about 5 minutes and then I start to apply. So in my first coats of epoxy, anytime I am doing like a glitter and vinyl mix or just a situation where I'm trying to make sure my glitters don't migrate to each other and sort of, contaminate, I always will start with either the lightest color or the vinyl section. So in this section, I'm sticking with the vinyl section because that's where I don't want to make sure I get any glitter. So I'm taking my clean gloved hand, right, and that fresh epoxy and spreading that epoxy on the vinyl section first before I take the rest of the epoxy and spread it on the glittered sections. Now I will still have to do just a little bit of cleanup, of course, in the vinyl section for a few rogue pieces of glitter that did end up in that vinyl section. But to sort of make sure that it's not a whole bunch of glitter, starting with your vinyl section first is definitely key. So here's me just kind of scooping the couple pieces that kind of migrated over there out with just my gloved hand. You can obviously, take these out or pull these out with like your craft knife or something, whatever kind of works for you. But I'm just going to take my time to just make sure I have no glitter on those sections. And then we'll go ahead and torch this to pop any bubbles. So I use a propane torch. I got this off of Amazon and I get my like refill cans from Walmart typically. So this is key to make sure that your bubbles do pop through your epoxy. So typically if you're mixing slow, you won't have a lot of bubbles, but you will introduce some bubbles when you're mixing or when you are applying your epoxy. So just making sure you have a strong torch like a propane torch. I definitely encourage a propane torch over a butane torch like the kitchen torches, just because propane torches definitely do pop more of your bubbles than a kitchen torch. Personally, in my preference and in my experience, I've gone through also several kitchen torches because they just like seem to stop working after a certain amount of time after you're filling them repeatedly. So switching to my propane torch has definitely been key when it comes to making sure that I don't have any bubbles in my epoxy when I am doing my coats of epoxy. So After 2 hours, I'm going to go in with my second coat of epoxy. So this is what we call a flood coat. And what a flood coat means is before your first coat of epoxy is dry, you're going in with an additional coat over top. So this is called a flood coat, as I mentioned. So my epoxy underneath is actually still very tacky and still very, not super wet, but it's definitely tacky to the touch, not fully cured. And so with fast cure epoxy, you can go in with that next coat of epoxy within 2 hours. If you're working with an artist cure and want to go in with a flood coat, you're going to want to wait about 4 to 6 hours before going in with an additional coat when the epoxy has really truly set on the cup, okay? So we're going to do an additional 20 mLs, and this is really going to smooth out our layer of epoxy. Make sure I have a nice smooth layer to work with for the next step of the process. So we've mixed our epoxy for 5 minutes. We've applied our epoxy and that up and down swiping motion, making sure to get the entire cup covered from top to bottom. And then of course, we will torch to remove any of the bubbles that we introduced when we're applying our epoxy. So now that we have finished torching our cup, we're going to let this cure on the turner for about 6 to 8 hours. The warmer your area is, your craft space is, the quicker that this epoxy will cure. So mine was done just about 4 hours later, and now is our opportunity to sand. So I'm really going to focus here on sanding the rough sections, which typically are the top and bottom of your tumbler. So I'm taking a 60 grit sand block, and I am scuffing and sanding that top rim, making sure that I am angling my sanding block at an angle to really make sure that we knock down all of that sharp glitter, okay? So once we have a much smoother top rim and bottom rim here, we're gonna go in with the next parts of our tumbler. So for this, because we're doing this really pretty Dream Big decal, I decided that I wanted to add some clouds to the background. So I have done a similar cup actually that I did on Instagram, I believe, in one of my lives, and we did sort of like this rainbow ombre with clouds in the background. And so I wanted to kind of recreate that, but in a different look with sort of the blue glitter base, but then applying, of course, clouds. So instead of doing the traditional white clouds though, because in this decal we have pink clouds, we're going to kind of mimic that in the background. So I'm just freehanding some clouds here. I am using a pink Posca paint pen. You don't necessarily need to have a Posca paint pen. Those are just my personal favorite, but you can certainly use any acrylic paint pen that you have to just help you kind of stencil out and draw out what you are going to be painting over. So once I've kind of drawn out around them, I'm just going to color them in with the paint pen. This will sort of act as my first initial coat of, paint, so to speak, before I go in with my actual acrylic paint over top of this. So I'm just, freehanding, of course, these clouds. You certainly could go to Cricut or go to your cutting software and cut out cloud shapes if that's easier or just works better for you in a shade of pink. For me, it just made sense to just draw them and freehand them and then color them in. So now that we have kind of colored them in with the paint pen, we're now going to take our time to paint over these, okay? So we're going to use this color acrylic paint pen. This is an apple barrel paint called Tickled Pink. And we're going to take a paintbrush and we're just going to paint over these. I'm going to have to do probably, I think I ended up doing about 3 coats of paint over these, simply because this Tickled Pink paint is a bit more translucent than I had hoped it was. So I needed to continue to do coats of paint in order to minimize the look of the brush strokes on the painted sections. So of course I'm not going to drag you through watching me paint this, but I did do my first initial coat, taking my time to really paint around all of that colored in section with my Posca paint pen, and then I let that section dry before going in with my second and then of course third coats. And as I mentioned, you could certainly just do an SVG that you found of cloud shapes and use that with vinyl on this if you preferred. I like to just include some form of hand painting just because I think it's fun. So once we have our clouds painted, we'll of course let them dry in between each coat. And again, I did about 3 coats in total. So just a quick speed session of me doing the second coat here. Again, we did the 3 coats total. You could do more if you wanted. I definitely felt like I could have gone with another coat, but I was kind of tired of going back and forth over these clouds. So I was like, I'm good with 3. I probably could do a fourth, but honestly, I'm good here. So now that that's dry, we're going to go ahead and move on. I'm going to take some washi tape that I purchased from Hobby Lobby. You can also snag this off of Amazon too. I will link it down in the description box, but we're going to use washi tape as sort of our vinyl line work here. You could go to Cricut and just use a rectangle shape to cut vinyl lines too if you wanted, but I find that this is just easier than going and fighting with Cricut to get something to cut for me. So I love washi tape as my go-to, especially because you can get so many different colors to use as your washi tape lines. I get this really pretty pastel bundle and this metallic bundle from Hobby Lobby, which I will link down in the description box, but I love it because it's like all of the perfect colors that you need in order to do like vinyl line work. So I just feel like it captures all the colors that I ever typically use when I'm trying to do vinyl lines, so it just works out perfectly. So the next thing I'm going to do is I am going to apply my decal. Now, if you are a beginner or you are someone who's not super confident, I definitely would encourage you to apply your layer of epoxy now. Don't go and apply your UV DTF decal unless you are super confident that you are going to be able to get it applied without pulling up your paint from the clouds behind it, okay? So as you can see, I'm taking my time here because I'm trying to make sure that the sticky transfer top is not pulling at any of the tape or any of the paint on the clouds. And I did end up pulling just a little bit up, which I then will just go in and fix with my paintbrush. But I would recommend, honestly, to go ahead and do a coat of epoxy after you've done your painted clouds before you go in and add your UV DTF. So I would do another coat of Fast Set if you're someone who's an early beginner or you're not super confident with laying a decal over top of an already painted surface to accidentally remove your paint. So I definitely would encourage to do that layer of epoxy. Just another 20 mLs, honestly, over that entire cup would be good. And then you can come back and do your decal, okay? So we added that decal there, and UV DTF are super simple. It's like almost working with a sticker that has a transfer sort of top here. You just apply it and then you push it down and then you just remove the top transfer. This decal is from my website, Leisha Be Creative. You can definitely check it out down in the description box, as well as all the other decals that we have on the website. So before I'm going to go into my final coats of epoxy, what you did just see me do was I applied a sealant. So you could take this over to the spray tent and again do a clear gloss spray paint. That's perfectly fine. But what I like to use, I like to use Minwax polyacrylic. So this is just a way to seal in your decals to make sure that it's not going to give you any trouble when you go to add your layers of epoxy. Sometimes with UV DTF decals and any sort of like metallic vinyls, sometimes those will repel the epoxy and sort of leave these dry spots or like divots where the epoxy almost looks dimpled in a lot of sections. And so to avoid that, you want to make sure that you seal your decals so that you don't have those issues when you're doing your final coats of epoxy. So now we're on to our final layer of epoxy. Same process as we did before. The only difference here is that we're using Flynn's Sister Supply Shop Artist Cure. So this is going to take a longer time to cure, about 8 to 12 hours in my particular climate here in New York. But if you're in warmer climates, of course, this is going to dry and cure a bit quicker. But for me, it's about 8 to 12 hours before I can pick it up and touch it. So we did 30 mLs for our first of 2 final coats, and we're going to torch this. And then of course I will do one more final coat, but here is the final look and results of the cup. So I think that this is adorable and cute. I might go back and add a couple things. I was thinking about adding maybe some foil flakes and maybe an outline to the clouds, but as it stands right now, I think this is pretty cute and pretty adorable. You'll have to let me know what you thought of today's tutorial down in the comment section. I love reading all your comments, but I can't wait to see you again next week for another tutorial.